am presenting Union Gospel Presses Sunday School Lesson number 12, Sunday, November 20th, 2022. The lesson is entitled Obedience Among Neighbors. Lesson text comes from Leviticus chapter 19, verses 9 through 18 and 33 through 37. Related scriptures are Psalms 15, 1 through 5, Ruth 2, 4 through 17, 1 Kings 21, 1 through 14, Matthew 5, 43 through 48, James 2, 1 through 9. The place is Mount Sinai. The time is 1445 BC. Last week, we looked at God's laws for the Sabbath, keeping his day holy. This week, we look at his laws concerning the way we treat our neighbors. We will find that God's commands were not simply rules to keep people in line, but were given for the good of his people. Today's aim, facts, to show that God gave laws for the welfare of the disadvantaged and to ensure honest business practices and proper interpersonal conduct. Principle, to help the students understand that God's will is for people to show honesty and concern for one another. Application, to make us more caring toward others and to ensure honesty in our practices. Illustrating the lesson, God's laws direct us to thinking of others. Practical points. 1. Selfishly hoarding everything we rightfully own is not pleasing to the Lord. Leviticus 19, 9 through 10. 2. Dishonesty of any kind no dishonesty of any kind should ever be found among God's people. Verses 11 through 13. 3. How we treat other people shows our true attitude toward God. Verses 14 through 16. 4. Hatred, anger, and grudges must be replaced by a commitment to love others. Verses 17 through 18. 5. Outsiders are to be welcomed, for we were once outsiders too. Verses 33 through 34. 6. Honesty and integrity in all relationships are paramount in the Lord's eyes. Verses 35 through 37. Golden text. Thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord. Leviticus 19:18. Today we have 3 lesson outlines. The first is compassion for the less fortunate. Leviticus 19, 9 through 14. The second is compassion in attitudes. Leviticus 19, 15 through 18. And the third is compassion in personal dealings. Leviticus 19, 33 through 37. Introduction. Compassion is a virtue that is in high demand but short supply in today's world. Multitudes of suffering people need someone to come alongside them, sympathize with them, and find ways to meet their needs. Yet, those who are inclined to take such a role are relatively few. One reason people stifle their compassion is that they fear being duped by unscrupulous manipulators. It seems the world is filled with persons who prey on the unsuspecting public. Yet Christians are taught to be compassionate and show mercy. Colossians 3:12, 1 Peter 3:8. For this demonstrates our relationship with Jesus, the ever compassionate one. Matthew 9:36, 15:32, Luke 7:13. In fact, the whole Bible is the story of God's compassion for his sinful and suffering creatures. Compassionate for the less fortunate. Leviticus 19:9. And when ye reap the harvest of your field, thou shalt not wholly reap the corners of thy field, neither shalt thou gather the gleanings of thy harvest. Verse 10. And thou shalt not glean thy vineyard, neither shalt thou gather every grape of thy vineyard. Thou shalt leave them for the poor and stranger. I am the Lord your God. Verse 11. Ye shall not steal, neither deal falsely, neither lie one to another. Verse 12. And ye shall not swear by my name falsely, neither shalt thou profane the name of thy God. I am the Lord thy God. Verse 13. Thou shalt not defraud thy neighbor, neither rob him. The wages of him that is hired shall not abide with thee all night until the morning. Verse 14, thou shalt not curse the deaf, nor put a stumbling block before the blind, but shalt fear thy God. I am the Lord. Help for the needy. Leviticus 19, 9 through 10. Israel's law recognized the perennial presence of needy persons in the land, and it provided means for their survival. The owners of grain fields, vineyards, and olive trees were obligated to allow remnants of their crops to remain for the poor. They were instructed, thou shalt not wholly reap the corners of thy field, neither shalt thou gather the gleanings of thy harvest. Harvesters were not to reap to the very edge of the field or into its corners. Some grain was to be deliberately left standing for the poor. Likewise, the stalks missed when the sheaves were bound were to be left for them. Even if a sheaf was left in the field by mistake, it was not to be picked up later. Deuteronomy 24:19. Owners of the vineyards also were instructed, thou shalt not glean thy vineyard, neither shalt thou gather every grape of thy vineyard. Leviticus 19:10. Some fruit was always to be left for the poor and stranger. Deuteronomy 21:24. Olive trees, though not specified here, also were included in this regulation. Deuteronomy 24:20 prohibits going back over the barrels a second time when beating or shaking them for their fruits. In addition, it was permissible to go into a neighbor's field or vineyard before the harvest and pick enough to satisfy one's hunger. Deuteronomy 23:24 through 25. But it was not legal to carry away any fruit in a container or to cut any grain with a sickle. By this combination of owners' generosity and the poor's labor, their basic needs were to be met. The book of Ruth provides a concrete example of how this was actually done. The conclusion of the command is, I am the Lord your God, Leviticus 19:10. This reminded Israel not only that the Lord demanded this of them, but also that compassion is consistent with his own nature. Israel was commanded to show compassion in ways befitting their agricultural economy. We should find ways to do so that are suitable to the society in which we live. Honest deeds and words, Leviticus 19:11 through 13. These verses forbid fraud against one's neighbor, whether by deed or word. Ye shall not steal repeats and applies the 8th commandment, Exodus 20:15, adding, neither deal falsely. Deceitful dealings are intended to take advantage of a person, getting from him some material or psychological benefit to which one is not entitled. This is stealing, whether done overtly or indirectly. Added to this prohibition is a second, neither lie one to another, Leviticus 19:11. This applies the 10th commandment, which forbids bearing false witness, Exodus 20:16. Stealing and lying go hand in hand. Both are forms of deceit. Here the lying occurs as a means of defrauding a neighbor of property or reputation. This leads into the next prohibition. Ye shall not swear by my name falsely, neither shalt thou profane the name of thy God, Leviticus 19:12. This is a reminder of the 3rd commandment, Exodus 27, which forbids taking God's name in vain. Some are not above enlisting his name in an evil cause. In this case, to cheat one's neighbor. A lie is sanctified by an oath, and the Lord's holy name is profaned. When Jacob deceived Isaac in order to steal Esau's blessing, he resorted to this. When he brought in the savory meat for his father, Isaac asked him with such suspicion, how did he obtain it so quickly? Jacob answered, because the Lord thy God brought it to me, Genesis 27:20. He did not just lie about the source of the meat, he profaned God's name in doing so. We need to be aware, we need to beware of those who constantly claim that God led them to do certain things. To be God's will, those deeds must be consistent with his word. To attach God's name to sin and falsehood is the most callous form of profanity. He reminds us solemnly, as he reminded Israel, I am the Lord, Leviticus 19:12. He will not overlook the guilt of the one who takes his name in vain, Exodus 27. After repeating the command to not defraud or rob a neighbor, Leviticus 19:13, this law is applied to the treatment of a hired worker. Day laborers were hired for a variety of tasks in biblical times. They were both native Israelites and foreigners, and they usually were poor. It was common practice to pay them each day at the end of the day, Matthew 28. The wages varied according to the agreement made with the employer. The commandment here condemns the practice of withholding wages even till the next morning. It is made specific in Deuteronomy 24:14-15, which emphasizes the worker's poverty and need. It also emphasizes that it makes no difference whether the worker is an Israelite or a foreigner. To withhold wages due is a sin God takes note of. Yet it was a sin taken too lightly by many in Israel. Jeremiah 22:13-17, Malachi 3:5. Respect for the disabled, Leviticus 19:14. Israel's law also condemned those who dishonored the infirm. Though thou shalt not curse the deaf focuses on an act that is cowardly, since the deaf cannot hear the curse and give any response. The appearance and behavior of the handicapped may seem strange, but mockery betrays a callous heart. Exodus 4:11. Especially equally callous is putting a stumbling block before the blind. The blind, this should be taken literally as placing an obstacle in front of a blind person to make him stumble and fall. We can hardly imagine a more heartless act. It would be done only for one's self-centered amusement. The law also condemned the one who caused the blind to wander from the way, Deuteronomy 27:18. To dishonor the disabled is to take lightly the God who created them. The alternative to these sins is to fear thy God, Leviticus 19:14. And the command ends with the reminder, I am the Lord, verses 10 and 12. Thus, the ultimate issue is not how we treat the infirm, but our attitude toward the God who made them. Compassion and attitudes, verse 15. Ye shall do no unrighteousness in judgment. Thou shalt not respect the person of the poor, nor honor the person of the mighty. But in righteousness shalt thou judge thy neighbor. Verse 16. Thou shalt not go up and down as a talebearer among thy people. Neither shalt thou stand against the blood of thy neighbor. I am the Lord. Verse 17. Thou shalt not hate thy brother in thine heart. Thou shalt in any wise rebuke thy neighbor and not suffer sin upon him. Verse 18. Thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord. Equity in judgment, Leviticus 19:15. Ye shall do no unrighteousness in judgment. Applies especially to judges and other officials, but it also related to anyone who could bring a lawsuit. This unrighteousness could take the form of either showing partiality to the poor or giving unmerited deference to the powerful. Scripture repeatedly emphasizes that the economic status of an individual should have no bearing on the outcome of a case. Each must be judged on its own merits. James 2:8 points out that when we fulfill the royal law of loving our neighbor as ourselves, we are doing well, whether that neighbor is rich or poor. But if we let that love lead us to showing favoritism, we are not showing true love and have transgressed the law. Verse 9. The key to justice is to judge our neighbor rightly and with fairness. Restraint in speaking, Leviticus 19:16. Israelites were forbidden to go up and down as a talebearer among thy people. Talebearer here should be understood as a slanderer. There is nothing more harmful to a peaceful society than the circulation of unfounded rumors and charges. It destroys trust and raises suspicions about all that is said. Jeremiah 9, 3-4. Neither shalt thou stand against the blood of thy neighbor. The law continues in Leviticus 19:16. By false accusations and false witness, one can actually endanger another's life. For when a false charge is upheld, the accused may be executed. God's reminder, I am the Lord, again declares that such behavior utterly contradicts his nature. He therefore refuses to tolerate it. Love for neighbor, Leviticus 19:17-18. So far, our lesson text has forbidden certain external practices that are inconsistent with God's nature. But now we find a recognition that the root problem of these acts is internal, and until this is remedied, the sinful practices will continue. Israel is therefore commanded, thou shalt not hate thy brother in thine heart. Until hatred is banished, all kinds of injustices will flourish. 1 John 3:15. The heart is the fountain of good and evil. Matthew 12:35, 15, 18-19. So it needs to be cleansed. This does not mean overlooking a brother's faults. Thou shalt in any wise rebuke thy neighbor. Leviticus 19:17. Rebuking someone for sin is actually doing him a favor, for it may rescue him from God's judgment. It also is a favor to oneself, and not suffer sin upon him. Really has the idea of not bringing sin upon oneself because of him. By remaining silent about his sin, we become partakers in it. Finally, a compassionate attitude means, thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, verse 18. Vengeance is the outward manifestation of a grudge in the heart. Both are forbidden. Vengeance is the prerogative of God alone. Deuteronomy 20:32-35, Romans 12:19, Hebrews 10:30. And we dare not assume it for ourselves. Instead, we must deal with the grudges that give rise to this impulse. Ephesians 4:31, James 4:11, 5:9. The positive counterpart of the prohibition against grudges is this: thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Leviticus 19:18. This means bestowing on another the same care and concern one normally has for oneself. This command is quoted several times in the New Testament, and Jesus called it the second great commandment. Matthew 22:39, Mark 12:31. This is understandable, for it sums up all other commands regarding a neighbor. Romans 13:9, Galatians 5:14, and God's authority is on it. Leviticus 19:18. Compassion and personal dealings. Verse 33. And if a stranger sojourn with thee in your land, ye shall not vex him. Verse 34. But the stranger that dwelleth with you shall be unto you as one born among you, and thou shalt love him as thyself. For ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Verse 35. Ye shall do no unrighteousness in judgment, in meat yard, in weight, or in measure. Verse 36. Just balances, just weights, a just ephah, and a just hin shall ye have. I am the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt. Verse 37, therefore shall ye observe all my statutes and all my judgments, and do them. I am the Lord. Fairness to strangers, Leviticus 19:33-34. This final section of our lesson singles out specific areas in which compassion is to be practiced. The first is fair treatment of resident aliens in Israel. To sojourn is to reside temporarily. Many such persons lived in Israel, and a tendency among God's chosen people might have been to discriminate against them. But the law specifically forbade Israelites to vex them, that is, to do them wrong. In fact, the stranger shall be unto you as one born among you, and thou shalt love him as thyself. Verse 34. Earlier, this command was given regarding the children of thy people, verse 18, speaking of the Israelites. Here it is extended to others as well. The same care lavished on countrymen must be extended to foreigners. The reason the Israelites were to love foreigners was that they themselves had been strangers in Egypt. Their nation had taken form in a foreign land, and they therefore should always sympathize with sojourners and manifest God's love to them. Fairness in business, Leviticus 19:35 through 36. Unjust dealings are nowhere more common than in business practices. The law therefore commands, ye shall do no unrighteousness in judgment, in meat yard, in weight, or in measure. Meat yard refers to a measuring stick or measurement of length, and measure refers to capacity. The law thus commands integrity in using measurements of length, weight, and capacity while conducting business in the market. Merchants therefore were to have just balances, just weights, a just ephah, and a just hin, verse 36. An ephah was a dry measure nearly equal to our bushel. A hin was a liquid measure, approximately a gallon. Deuteronomy 25:13 through 15 forbids the deceitful practice of using two different sets of weights and measures. The Lord's reason for this just standards was, again, his own nature and authority. I am the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt. Leviticus 19:36. Rationale for compassion. Leviticus 19:37. At the conclusion of these commands, the Lord directed the Israelites' minds back to the reason for them. He was the Lord Yahweh, who had a special relationship with them. Therefore, their behavior was to exalt his name. Exodus 19:5 through 6. Questions. 1. How were farmers in Israel to provide for the poor? 2. How are stealing and lying similar? 3. How might someone today invoke God's name for an evil cause? 4. How were Israelites to be fair in their treatment of hired workers? 5. Why is mistreatment of the disabled such a serious sin? 6. What two wrongs must be avoided in legal cases? 7. What serious consequences can result from slandering a person? 8. How can we rebuke a neighbor and still love him? 9. What status were resident aliens to have in Israel? Why should the Israelites have appreciated this? 10. How are God's people to conduct themselves in business transactions? This concludes the Sunday School lesson for Sunday, November 20th, 2022. Thank you for listening. God bless.